In popularity corresponds with a $2.2 billion TV rights deal the WNBA signed for 2026 that covers the next 11 years, which ESPN reports will increase the league's annual revenue by about $200 million a season. Yet, WNBA players say they're not being paid what they're owed. Right now, they get less than 10% of the league's total revenue, a strikingly slim margin when compared to other pro sports leagues in which athletes typically split revenues about 50-50.
Let's be real here.
All right, let's dive into this. 5 input paragraphs means 5 output paragraphs. No merging, no splitting, just pure engaging voiceover gold, exactly as requested.
In the past 6 months, all we have been hearing about is how the WNBA is having a record-breaking event after another, and yet not paying its players a fair salary. The simple answer is the league is just not making enough money. And it's basically just been trying to stay afloat all these years. Well, until the $2.2 billion media rights deal it signed with Disney, Amazon Prime, and NBC just a couple of months ago. And of course, the announcement of the 3 new teams that will be added to the league in the next few years. That will all flush the WNBA with much needed cash. This, of course, coincides with the collective bargaining agreement that will be negotiated after the 2025 season. CNBC dug into the nuances of the league's business model to really see how likely it is that the salaries will match up to the influx of the cash in the next few years.
The WNBA seriously thinks they've pulled off the con of the century, right? I mean, the league is out here swearing up and down that ratings are absolutely exploding. Sponsors are practically lining up around the block, and everyone on the planet suddenly cares about women's basketball. But here's the wild twist. They've actually been caught playing a little game of hide and seek with the real numbers, and the whole thing completely blew up in their face after Caitlyn Clark's recent injury. So I gotta ask you, honestly, who actually believes this nonsense?
$2 billion media rights deal out there.
There's rumor of it?
Reporting about the next media rights deal.
Then if you, I'm not great with numbers, low ball.
Why do you say that?
That's a low ball. You're saying how much?
2.2 billion over 11
Not
years.
enough. Not even close. Now, I'm not trying to inflate it a whole lot, but a 2's nice. An 8 would be better. That's what I'm talking about because they know. They know, and we certainly have come a long way.
Look, if there's one skill the WNBA has truly mastered, it's pretending things are way better than they actually are. And lately, they've been busy polishing up their latest success story. They're constantly pointing to ratings increases, acting like attendance figures are through the roof, and just generally making it seem like their financial future is absolutely golden. Except when you actually start digging into the nitty-gritty details, nothing really lines up. And of course, Caitlyn Clark's injury ended up being the perfect test, an undeniable moment to see what was really going on.
WNBA players want as much money as the NBA players. So the NBA actually generates extreme amounts of revenue. Somebody wrote a joke about it. The WNBA wanted what their just pay was, and so they owe $400 million because that's really how it balances out. It's like a losing. It's never been profitable.
Now, the league loves to brag about that shiny $2.2 billion TV rights deal that's set to kick in back in 2026. They want every single one of us to believe that ESPN, CBS, ABC, and whoever else just couldn't resist throwing billions of dollars at what they claim is the hottest league in America. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The WNBA didn't actually earn that deal. Nope, it was the NBA, specifically Adam Silver, who strong-armed the networks into it. He knew darn well nobody was paying real money for pretend basketball, so he basically made the WNBA a package deal. You want NBA games? Fine, but guess what? You're also taking WNBA games, whether you like it or not. That, my friends, is not market success. It's a forced bundle, like being told you can't get Wi-Fi unless you also pay for a landline you'll literally never use. The league might pretend this is proof of incredible growth, but what it really shows is a deep fundamental dependency. And let me tell you, if the NBA ever decided to pull the plug, the WNBA would vanish faster than a politician's promise after Election Day. That $200 million per season figure they keep throwing around, that's not revenue generated by actual demand. It's a pure, unadulterated handout. Yet WNBA players, oh, they treat it like it's their golden ticket. Suddenly, they think their salaries should double. maybe even triple, or somehow magically match NBA paychecks. And here's where the comedy truly kicks in. WNBA players currently receive less than 10% of league revenue, especially compared to the roughly 50-50 split in the NBA. Now that sounds unfair if you just stop right there, doesn't it? But the absolutely crucial detail, the one they conveniently gloss over, is that the WNBA doesn't actually generate a profit at all, not ever. They operate at a loss every single year, and it's the NBA that covers the staggering difference. Yet these players want to split money that simply doesn't exist. They want 50% of negative numbers. Good luck trying to cash that check. Seriously. And of course, because nothing screams urgent national issue like making sure a bench player in the WNBA gets a bigger slice of an imaginary pie, politicians quickly jumped right into the fray. The Democratic Women's Caucus even sent letters to the league, literally demanding a fair CBA, as if WNBA players are somehow coal miners being criminally underpaid for risking their lives underground. Nope, they're athletes in a league that genuinely wouldn't survive a single month without NBA welfare. But Congress, incredibly, treats them like victims of oppression. It's absolutely wild. Now let's finally talk ratings, because this is where things get genuinely interesting. After Caitlyn Clark went down, the league suddenly had this golden opportunity to actually prove what they've been claiming for months. We're bigger than one player. They kept repeating that she wasn't carrying the league, that there were plenty of stars, and that people would tune in no matter what. So what actually happened? According to the numbers they've bothered to share, the WNBA averaged 969,000 viewers across ABC, ESPN, CBS, and ION. They celebrated this like they had just broken the entire sports world wide open, shouting, "It's the most watched season since 1998. And sure, that sounds impressive until you actually look at the context, because when Caitlyn Clark plays, numbers spike. When she doesn't, they absolutely plummet. For example, her Indiana team pulled in a massive 1.3 million viewers on ION for just one game. The other 7 Indiana games, without her, averaged only 924,000. That's a noticeable drop, right? And the rest of the league without her involvement? Just 505,000. That's barely half. On CBS, the Indiana team with Clark averaged a whopping 1.8 million viewers. The rest of the WNBA, a meager 83,000. On ABC, Clark's games consistently pulled 2 million, while the rest barely scraped over 1 million. And on ESPN, Clark averaged 1.4 million, with the rest hitting only 6. Do you see the pattern here? The growth isn't the league, it's one player. But here's the truly shady part. Not all ratings were even reported. Specifically, 4 games on ESPN and ABC, both owned by Disney, suddenly had no numbers available. They just vanished. Why? Did ESPN misplace them in the mail? Did some intern accidentally delete the file? Or maybe, just maybe, those games bombed so spectacularly that reporting the truth would completely expose the WNBA's entire hype machine. This wouldn't even be the first time ESPN conveniently forgot ratings. Remember when Pat McAfee's show absolutely tanked? ESPN magically stopped releasing his numbers after a while. Same exact playbook here. So while the WNBA struts around shouting about record growth, the actual truth is hidden in plain sight. The games that do well almost always involve Caitlyn Clark. The games that don't, they're buried, ignored, or quietly just not reported. And yet, the league insists that this somehow proves their star power is balanced across all teams. Balanced? Please. That's like saying the Beatles were just another band. And let's not even forget attendance. The WNBA loves to point out that 7 teams averaged over 10,000 fans a game this season. Wow, right? Except, take a much closer look. The Minnesota Lynx, supposedly one of the league's strongest franchises, averaged just under 10,000 in an arena that seats twice that. So even their best markets are filling seats at only half capacity. If this were any other business, it would be called underperformance, plain and simple. But in WNBA land, mediocrity consistently gets spun as victory. This is exactly why Caitlyn Clark's injury was such an absolute nightmare for the league. She's not just a player, she's the league's literal life support. Without her, ratings sag, attendance falls, and the entire illusion of success cracks wide open. But instead of admitting that glaring truth, the WNBA cooked up their latest PR campaign. See? Ratings are still up without her. Except, When you strip away all the spin, what they're calling up is basically flatlined interest compared to the massive surge she alone created. And what about the players themselves? They're acting like this supposed growth means it's payday, demanding bigger contracts, private charter flights, and revenue splits that quite literally don't even exist. Meanwhile, the actual product hasn't improved one bit. The basketball is sloppy, the pace is slow, and half the league's headlines come from off-court drama, not actual competition. People aren't tuning in for the fundamentals, they're tuning in for Caitlyn Clark, for the controversy, and for the circus atmosphere the WNBA itself actively encourages. But let's pause for a second and truly ask yourself this. If Caitlyn Clark hadn't entered the league, what would the WNBA be right now? Would there even be a TV deal? Would anyone be talking about attendance? Would politicians be writing letters about revenue share? Or would the league still be quietly bleeding money, begging the NBA to keep them alive? This is what makes the WNBA's ratings trickery so incredibly frustrating. They're not just inflating numbers, they're actively rewriting the story of their own survival. They desperately want casual fans to think that women's basketball is finally breaking through, that the momentum is organic, and that the support is widespread. But in reality, it's artificial, it's fragile, and it's completely propped up by one player's undeniable popularity. Without her, the entire house of cards collapses. And look, nobody is saying Caitlyn Clark's injury means the league is doomed tomorrow. But what it absolutely does is expose the raw truth they've been desperately hiding. The WNBA is still the exact same league it's always been, dependent, subsidized, and completely desperate for external validation. And as long as they keep hiding ratings, exaggerating growth, and demanding money they haven't earned, the gap between their fantasy and reality is only going to get wider and wider and wider. Let's just carry on with this whole growth myth the WNBA has been peddling, because if there's one thing they do consistently, it's take tiny scraps of data, wrap it in shiny packaging, and just desperately hope nobody actually opens the box to look inside. When the league parades its record ratings, it absolutely loves to leave out key context. For example, yes, this was the most watched season since, but here's what they conveniently don't tell you. Back in 1998, TV audiences in general were exponentially much bigger because people didn't have Netflix, YouTube, TikTok, and 500 other options fighting for their attention. So, since 1998 isn't exactly the flex they think it is, it's like bragging you beat your high score in a video game you haven't played in 25 years. Cool, but ultimately meaningless. And let's talk about that magical number they keep repeating, 6 to 9,000 average viewers. Sure, that sounds okay at first glance, but for perspective, that's basically one episode of a mid-tier cable reality show. We're talking rerun of Shark Tank on CNBC level. The WNBA isn't competing with the NBA, NFL, or MLB. It's competing with 90 Day Fiancé and barely winning. If your league's biggest accomplishment is edging out a show about failed marriages, maybe, just maybe, calm down on the "we're exploding" narrative. Now about those missing ESPN and ABC ratings. This is where it gets truly shady. Out of all their broadcast partners, only Disney's networks forgot to release 4 games worth of ratings. What a coincidence, right? If those games had pulled huge numbers, do you honestly think ESPN would have hidden them? Of course not. They would have blasted them across every single press release they could print. That tells you everything you need to know. Those games tanked, and instead of owning it, the league and their media buddies simply shoved the numbers under the rug. This is the part that really annoys normal fans. Transparency matters. If the WNBA was honest and said, look, some games draw big crowds because of certain stars and some don't, we're working on it, people might actually respect that. But instead, they hide, they spin, and they overhype absolutely everything here. That's why people roll their eyes when the league brags about progress. It doesn't feel earned, it feels entirely manufactured. And let's not ignore how Caitlyn Clark completely exposes this charade. With her, the numbers jump to actual respectable level. Without her, they sink right back down to niche curiosity. She is the product, whether the league likes it or not. But instead of embracing that and building around it, they desperately try to downplay it. They act like she's just another piece of the puzzle. Yeah, right. That's like saying Michael Jordan was just another player on the Bulls. It's actually kind of sad watching the league bite the hand that feeds it. Caitlyn Clark is literally the only reason they're relevant, yet they treat her like she's completely replaceable. They push other names, Bonner, Stewart, Wilson, Thomas, as if the casual audience cares. Newsflash, they don't. The numbers unequivocally prove it. Without Caitlyn, the entire hype disappears. But the league keeps lying to itself, pretending fans are showing up for the whole product. No, they're showing up for her, period. And here's the bigger issues: sustainability. Sure, you can spin one season into a fake success story, but what about 5 years from now? What about when Caitlyn Clark isn't the fresh face anymore? What if she gets hurt again, or her appeal wears off? Who's carrying the league then? The sad truth is, nobody. The league hasn't built a foundation, it's just riding a wave, and waves crash. You can already see cracks forming. Attendance outside of Indiana is wildly inconsistent. Teams brag about sellouts, but a sellout in a 10,000-seat arena isn't exactly jaw-dropping, especially when those numbers often include free or heavily discounted tickets handed out just to fill seats. And the TV side, that's even more fragile. One superstar cannot carry ratings forever. If networks ever stop caring, those billions go away, and suddenly the WNBA is right back to begging the NBA for life support. And speaking of money, let's touch on the player demands again, because this part is pure comedy gold. WNBA players look at that $2.2 billion TV deal and immediately assume it means bigger paychecks. They want a bigger cut, more perks, and salaries that actually resemble their NBA counterpart. But here's the kicker: they don't seem to realize that none of this money actually comes from genuine demand for their product. It's forced, it's bundled, it's charity. Think about it. If the WNBA really was worth $200 million a season, why did the networks never offer that deal on their own? Why did it take Adam Silver twisting arms to make it happen? Because in reality, the demand simply isn't there. Fans aren't begging for more games. ESPN isn't rushing to schedule primetime WNBA doubleheaders. The numbers just don't justify it. Yet, the players act like they've earned this giant payday. It's entitlement at its absolute finest. They see NBA players splitting revenue 50-50 and think they deserve the same. But the NBA actually generates billions in profit. The WNBA doesn't. It's like comparing a lemonade stand to Starbucks and demanding the same paycheck. And when you point this out, suddenly you're the bad guy. You're anti-women. You don't support equality. No, it's not about gender. It's about basic math. If the money isn't there, you can't spend it. End of story. Now let's circle back to Caitlyn Clark's injury, because this was the moment the league had to prove it wasn't a one-player show, and they failed. Ratings dipped, excitement faded, even the media coverage slowed down significantly. The only stories people cared about were off-court drama, political nonsense, or league spin about growth. Basketball itself, almost irrelevant. That should absolutely terrify them. Sports leagues thrive when the product is the star. The NFL doesn't need one player to carry it. Neither does the NBA, MLB, or NHL. Sure, stars matter, but the league itself stands tall. The WNBA, it collapses without Clark. That's not a healthy league, that's a circus tent, held up by one pole. Take away the pole and the whole thing comes crashing down. At the end of the day, this league isn't in panic because of Caitlyn Clark's injury alone. They're in panic because it exposed everything they've been hiding. The ratings spin, the attendance fluff, the fake growth, it all crumbled the moment their golden goose was sidelined. And the scary part for them, they know it. Deep down, they know without her, this whole success story is just smoke and mirrors.